never been to this show, so it's a big deal. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I know people are still kind of finding their way up. Thank you for coming this afternoon. Hopefully there'll be some information you can take with you or questions that we can answer. My name is June Coleman, and Robin McGregor. We work at Emporia State University in the Career Center. In our center we have really 2.5 counselors. Robin Steverson is part-time as a career counselor, and then David and myself. And we teach a career course each semester, either one section or 2 sections. And Robin and I have been teaching the course for 6 or 7 years, something like that. So really what we're going to talk about today is based on our work really with students in that career course, but it can be very useful in terms of working with students one-on-one and individually with students. But we are about 6,000 students at Emporia State. Gosh, we probably, like most departments, don't see a good portion of our students that we want to be seeing, but the ones we do see, we are able to work with. So, but what we're going to talk about today, we are here to kind of talk about the career thoughts inventory, but we don't work for CCI. We don't sell this instrument anyway, but there are ways that it can be useful. So it's a piece of the information that we'll talk about this afternoon. But you know, as Craig was talking about this morning, assessments are sort of a look into the window of more information and to kind of get you started. So it's not, we don't use this all by itself and solely look at what that involves, but it is a useful tool if we're working with students. So that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So anything else you want to...
Just want to say, and we've all operated these improperly. It's amazing what you can do with a piece of paper. It actually, without carrying the perforations, will open so that you can read the questions if you've never seen it. See, they're all nodding. They already knew. I mean, they are. Usually we all rip them off for reading stuff.
So let me start by saying that, as I mentioned, we teach this career course, and I don't know if you'll listen to that first slide or not, but this is, our career course is really based on our philosophy of career counseling, which is probably many of yours, and there's listening literature as well. But you know, the first goal is to talk about the student's interest in getting those kinds of questions in terms of what motivates them, what do you do in your spare time, what kinds of classes do you like, what don't you like, really sort of establishing that relationship with them to kind of get at what those interests are. You're doing a full self-assessment. The second stage really is exposure to what their options are that match those kinds of interests, and that's that knowledge of careers. So, you know, it's one thing to know who you are and what you enjoy, but then it's important to know what that target is or what's out there that might match those kind of interests that you have. And then the third piece is that decision-making part. So taking what are you interested in, what are some careers that might match those kinds of things, and then finally deciding on what that intersection looks like or where those things or where that crossroads is. So our career course is definitely based on those 3 stages of career development. Our individual counseling is based on those 3 stages of career development. And we always tell students when they're, you know, as freshmen in our classes, we all want students to be here at that decision-making point. They come and they visit campus. What's your major? What's your major? What's your major? And that's what we're always focusing on. And so there's a high level of stress. That's a trigger for students. Oh, I don't know what my major is. I don't have the pieces of information that I need. So we work a lot with students about you've got to go back to that first stage and helping them get there and helping them research different careers and what are the tools that are out there. So our course is really designed for undecided students, and over time, these 6 or 7 years that we've been teaching it, our advising staff has really helped us in academic advising to direct those students even better into that class. A lot of times, you know, it's an 8-week course, it's the second part of the semester, and we have students that are failing something in the first 8 weeks, and then they try to switch over to our class, which is typically an A or a B. I mean, it's not a difficult, rigorous class. So we get a lot of those kinds of students, but now we're really finding that many of them are exactly the kind of students we want, freshman, sophomore level, undecided. It is 8 weeks for 2 credits, and it does include several things built into the course that require them to meet with any of our staff members at least one time in an instructor meeting so that we can, you know, oftentimes that class is 40, 45 students. We've capped it now at 30 to 35 because it's a little more manageable, but we've got to build in that one-on-one time with them because it's very difficult for us to individually get at their needs in that class. So that's really how the course is based. In fall, it is offered the second 8 weeks. In the spring, it is offered the first 8 weeks because generally they're a little closer maybe to that decision point after one semester under their belt as freshmen. What we're finding, I guess the reason we started looking at this career thoughts inventory is because we felt like we were walking students through those 3 stages, but getting to that decision-making point and finding out that there was actually some faulty thinking at the decision-making point. So maybe they had all the resources they needed. Maybe they were very clear on what their interests were, and they were very clear on what careers matched those interests, but they just couldn't get to that decision-making point. And so several semesters went by, and we thought, how do we capture that decision-making snapshot of all the factors that come into a decision point? So are they having anxiety about making a decision, anxiety about committing to that decision? What are the external barriers that are out there that are influencing that decision? You know, this morning in the parents and families panel, they talked about the level of involvement of family members in a student's decision on jobs and internships and all that kind of stuff. So there are so many factors that pull into that decision-making piece. We felt like, what the heck? We're getting through these 2 stages that are really good, but we cannot get to that decision point. So that's kind of how this discussion started with Robin and I. What resources and tools are out there that can help us get students into that, looking at that decision-making point? So Robin did extensive research last year in terms of assessments that were out there and found this CTI, this career thoughts inventory. Anybody using this maybe as a part of your counseling? Christy, you are. Great. Okay, so you know all about it. How long have you used it?
Well, one of our professors who teaches in our graduate counseling program, he teaches the career development class, and I sat in on that as a refresher because I had taken mine so long ago. And he did some pilot research doing this kind of a combination of assessments with high school students when he was a high school guidance counselor, and before he went on to get his PhD. And so his area is career development. And so we actually did, with all of our freshmen this year, we administered CPI at the beginning of the semester. Those that had a certain percentage that we thought were maybe they could use some career intervention in terms of doing some workbook activities. So we offered the option of doing the workbook one-on-one with graduate assistants and another graduate assistant in our psychology, our counseling department. We only had 2 students actually be brave enough to partake in going through the workbook, but we also have done the self-directed search. So now we're going to do a post and administer the CPI in my vocational situation again. But it was very interesting for us to start to get a picture of what our freshmen are up against in terms of some of their external barriers of making this decision. So,
good.
Yeah,
so what were you finding? What kinds of issues were you finding from that?
We have Americans to Knowing students, so there's some indicators of the external, I think some expectations around concerned about, I guess, like the availability of options to them. I think they have more restrictive ideas about what they can and cannot do, so we saw some of that, and we also saw some just weird outliers. So we'd have these really strong students that are really well divided, and then they have this really high, like, external kind of force, so like some of these outliner type things. And one of the students that came to do the workbook, our graduate assistant, I was working with him, said, wow, I had to, like, realize I was talking to an 18-year-old as a freshman because he had such stress and such anxiety about making this right decision. And so we haven't had a chance to really delve in because this is kind of our first pilot of doing something like this, and for us to be offering a course kind of like you guys. But it was something that Dr. David Strong, who's our professor, he's still very...
taught at ESU. He did teach it. He was my professor. He taught career counseling.
Yes,
He's wonderful.
So Dr. David Strong and I are working on that.
Oh, good. I'm going to talk to you more. Well, thank you. And we'll talk about kind of why we chose this particular tool. I mean, there's some definite advantages to it to kind of help you talk about it. So, good. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So do put me on this because felt like I didn't have enough to do. Initially started looking at decision processes and thinking maybe there's something there that we're not using. And it really came to the conclusion, we talk about decision making when we talk about the values in the class, and we talk about the personality type, when we talk about the last thing that they do, which is a synthesis project, they have to develop goals. We talk a lot about decision-making processes, and actually I think some of it probably doesn't even appeal to a receiver as much as it would to a judger. So it came to the conclusion that it really wasn't that piece that was the problem, and I stumbled on this instrument and realized that maybe this is the right approach. No surprise, it was developed by folks down at Florida State University. They also were instrumental, I think, hand in hand with the whole cognitive information theory, because a lot of the same names show up on that. So it's been around for almost 20 years. It's just a little other details in the background, just so you know, it's legit. If you've looked at the instrument, it measures negative thoughts. And so they have a choice of indicating how strongly they agree with those negative statements. They sort of condense the areas of indecision down to three subjects, and it's decision-making confusion. So you'll hear students say things like, I just don't know where to begin, or I have so many choices, I don't know what to do, and just overwhelmed with information. Commitment anxiety, which is oftentimes the student who says, the 18-year-old student that says, I'm about to make a decision for the rest of my life, echo, echo, echo. You know, they just, it's for them, it's such a big deal. So that's generally one of the comments that I hear a lot. And last, of course, most of the time external conflict can be parents. I had one student a couple years ago that was applying for a scholarship, and we asked her what would keep her from coming to school and graduating, and it's her peers, which I thought was extremely sad, but her peer group didn't believe in college, and they were giving her a lot of grief. And so identifying those and having the students be able to categorize it that way is really helpful.
And even some cultural, Christine mentioned
Yeah.
the cultural issues. Those are, this helps you get some of those too, is, you know, what we're working with sometimes is students that have pursued a major all till the end, and they're getting ready to do mock interviews and actually go out and convince an employer this is where they want to be, and they're not. You know, those passions you talked about this morning, Craig talked about, those external barriers or pushes or influences have pulled them all the way through to the graduation point, and they've now got to market this degree in a way that they really aren't very fired up about it. So that's another way so you see it at the very end.
Exactly. And this instrument doesn't really apply on it, but it is really for college students. It's for any point in that college experience. So choosing a major, choosing a career, or even a job searching. We basically, through our course, use it. The guide on the instrument says you can use it all these ways. And we really, without even realizing what we're doing, I suppose, do use it all these ways. It's self-directed, like y'all are using. They can actually, this instrument is easy enough that they can actually score it, and then there's a workbook that goes with it that we're going to show y'all, so they can help look at their negative thoughts and then reframe those. In the guided section, those would be the one-on-one that we have with the student. It is an outstanding instrument for you to be able to ask very targeted questions of the students, because they've already indicated on there what sort of things are bothering them. And so it's really easy, you know, it can be as obvious as I see here that you answered this way. Can you tell me about it? And sometimes it's a little more subtle than that. The assessment is for your individual, so you can see which area is causing them the most stress. We have some that, you know, they have great support at home, so they're very low on that, but they're through the roof on maybe the commitment anxiety. The screening, like y'all are doing, I wish we could get 100% of our students, incoming freshmen, to take something. We're not there yet at ESU, but if you could, it would certainly help you, I think, identify the students who are at risk, or you know, really, as retention even, because of some high stress in one of those areas. And then finally, of course, going back to the first one, it's a learning resource, because what you do is you teach the students different perspectives on how they view careers, and you give them some tools to maybe learn how to reframe thinking even beyond the career sort of thoughts they might be having. Anything you want to? a little more detail about it. It is normed for high school, 11th to 12th graders, college I already talked about, and adults who are either re-entering the workforce or thinking about changing. So it's a great tool from that perspective. You see, if you've opened it up, there's just 48 questions, and like I said, from a negative perspective. It's written at the 6th, 7th grade level, which probably covers all of us, I hope. I don't think there's anything. And here's the attractive part, too. It's fairly inexpensive. And so, and as I said, easy to administer. It can be self-administered. And then quickly scored. I will say it's not hard to score, but you have to, every time I do it at the beginning of the semester, I go back and reread it. I don't know what your experience is, but, you know, you add these columns up and add these columns up, and then it's easy. You just have to follow the instructions and not be, you know, distracted by squirrels or something like that.
And unlike the, you know, also the administration, the interpretation of it is more accessible to staff members so that, you know, we've been through that 5-day strong and MBTI certification, which is highly expensive and very useful, but when you're looking at budgets and certification of your staff, this could be fairly accessible too. I mean, that was appealing to us as well. Okay, so our particular data includes 3 semesters of our course that we have taught. It includes 117 students, and these were the assessments that we administer with the course. So we do the strong within the course, we do the CTI, we do the MBTI, and we do the pre and post. Oh, I know one comment I was going to make about the MBTI. What we know about, if you all have done the MBTI training, you know that when you're high stress, you're in that grip that they talk about, where high stress levels, kind of your whole cognitive process is kind of shut down, and where your strengths and your abilities were, all of a sudden you can't always access those. So often the CTI helps them identify very simply on that instrument when they cannot articulate where that stress is coming from. They can't kind of work through that stress to articulate what it is that they're thinking about, what's their barriers, all that kind of stuff. This, again, can be a pretty good tool to say, you know, I see that you indicated people that are important to your life are strongly influencing you here. Tell me a little bit more about that. Who are those people, or how do you feel that pressure, or whatever. So that is a very helpful thing. Our pre and post survey, that's a series of 7 questions that ask some things about, we talked about confidence levels this morning, just giving them the ability at the end of the class to say, oh, you know, I do have some confidence about being able to look at these resources and make a decision. So our pre and post measures, I have ability to identify my career interests. Disagree, strongly disagree, strongly agree, whatever. I feel fairly decided on my major, and they have to respond to that. So it's really just 7 questions that we ask on the first day and the last day of the course, and it gives us really good information. Then when we build in that instructor meeting, so that during that instructor meeting we go through these assessments with them. We do a group interpretation in the class, so they have lots of information. But again, what we are finding is, I think we're doing all this stuff, we're giving them all the information, why can't we get into that good career, why, you know, what's stopping them still? So that really helps us get to that. So, anything else about that kind of stuff?
Were you going to cover how the back end?
Yes, okay, so let's talk about scoring a little bit. When you look at the inside of this, you know, these are, once you pull this off, if you were to pull it off, then there's a way that you go through and actually score their responses to these particular items. And then on the back, what we do is, you will see in the middle, we're going to look at the profile for college students. Do you want to open it? Okay. You will see there's a CTI total. This is under profile for college students. CTI total. The DMC is that decision-making confusion, CA is commitment anxiety, and EC is external conflict. So what we do is we total all those scores, and the 50 percentile is really average, so below that means that, lower scores means those aren't necessarily red flags. Anything above 50 or higher are red flags. So, there are scores certainly that when we look at them, one of those three areas is going to jump out. Maybe all three of them are quite a bit above that 50. So then we can talk about all three of those pieces. But certainly if one jumps up really high, then that's kind of where we tend to focus. And then we pull out those exact questions and start to begin to talk about those kinds of things. But it is fairly easy to score. What we do is on their, we're a CSO school, so in the notes observation section, counseling notes of their profile, we simply enter their CTI scores, so we can not only use that with our instructor meetings, but we have that for future reference when they come in again or after the class if we're still working with them. Okay, listening? Okay. Because we're close to getting this. Okay. This is kind of how our class goes too. When we teach it, you're going right. Okay. So what we do is we start with the statements that they mark strongly agree, and that's the essay that you can see there. If there are less than 10 items, you add the agree and mark all of these items. On a piece of paper, you create two columns, one labeled old career thoughts and new career thoughts. So in this workbook that you get if you purchase this instrument, it gives you a great guide. And again, this is another accessibility feature. But there's a worksheet that we have them work through that goes through old career thoughts and new career thoughts. You probably can't see that, but really on this side, there's old career thoughts and there's new career thoughts. And it's very easy. In fact, what we do is we go through the CTI interpretation with the whole class prior to the instructor meeting, and then we have them complete this worksheet in class as well. And we give them a very good example, and I think one of our slides you'll see.
This is some instructions, but we'll do that.
Yeah. So this is really what we pull out in the class. So as you can see on that left-hand side, my dad expects me to be an accountant because I will have job security and good pay. How many times have you heard that? Like a million times, right? And then the new career side, we have them, actually what we do is we have them choose an item in class that they want to pull out as an example. And they take that statement, here's my old career thought, and then on the right-hand side, my new one would be my dad's opinion is important. So acknowledge that, and I also want security and good pay. I will see if I can identify a career that meets my needs, values, personality, skills, interests. Those are the four pieces we talk about at the beginning of the class in that first stage, and we'll offer the sort of security and pay that will reassure my dad. So this is, we talked about in the morning sessions, these impacts are really important on the student. We don't want to, I think Dana was the one that talked about that in the panel this morning. We want to pull those relationships in. We want to acknowledge they're extremely important in a student's decision, but we want them to gain some autonomy too as they talk about that influence, to also be able to say, I can see this right here, but I also see this other piece that's important to me, and how can those two things work together? So this is helping them to get the words to sort of reframe that career thought.
And the nice thing about the booklet is that each one of these, and this is the original faulty thought, and what we do is encourage them to personalize it. I mean, then give more ownership of it. And then the book will have that statement, and then underneath that statement will be a couple of paragraphs just to get people to start thinking about a different way of thinking about it. It will raise some questions. So, for example, the student said, I'm overwhelmed and don't know where to begin. The couple paragraphs might talk about, how can you break this down into multiple pieces? Have you asked, have you gone to a counseling center and found out about how you could research information? So it gives them some concrete things that they can sort of latch onto. And then they're able to sort of maybe reframe that, and this is kind of where we come into sometimes. But those paragraphs really can help them. And it is designed for them to work independently, so they're pretty good at sort of pushing people out of that spot that they're in.
And even on that old career thought, if you think about it, those three stages of the career decision, that second stage is knowledge of careers. if the student doesn't have that, they may absolutely agree with their dad. Accounting is it for me, right? So it works in hand with that, giving them all those new occupations to think about. So that kind of has to be there also for them to say, oh, you know, I could look at this differently. Okay, I got it.
And just as a note, we give them the CPI for the first day in class, and so, and then I think it must be the second or third day when we actually have a chance to get this back, and it's usually the second time, I think, but sometimes Greg messes that up, but, so they get this feedback pretty quickly, and then meanwhile, we're giving them this other information about them and careers and so forth, so.
And then, do we purchase this for all students? Absolutely not. We copy a couple pages from it because we own it, which, you know, we probably shouldn't. We purchase everything else, but we do copy a couple pages from this and give it to them in class. But even without the assessment or purchasing it, you can see how some of this kind of guided counseling can happen even without the instrument. So we're not just promoting, I mean, it's expensive to do this, so you can certainly pull in many of these strategies, I think, just using the same kind of reframing without the instrument too.
So within our program, there are two real pieces of the self-directed for the students. The first is that, you know, they take the instrument the first day. It's either the second or third class where we're talking about strengths and barriers of the students. And so we have some things we go through in class. And then they're required to write a reflection paper. And that reflection paper, they're supposed to identify strengths and identify what they perceive as barriers. And then actually, because we've talked about some of it, we want them to start thinking about how they can capitalize on their strengths and either eliminate or minimize some of those barriers they're having to making major decisions or career decisions. So that's the first way that they use. I mean, they take, and they have that in conjunction with the workbook and what they've already done. So we're sort of giving them those tools to help them write that paper. And then the final for the class is a synthesis project in which they are required to reflect on all the things they've learned about themselves. So we'll ask them again to go over and they have to list their strong, their top, well actually there's all six in priority. They have to reflect on what their MBTI results were, what their values are, how much money they're thinking about making in a career. There are two tracks on that synthesis project. One is for students who've decided, and one for students who are still undecided at the end of the class. And then we work them through some decision-making things about identifying your top three, what are the pros and cons, and so forth. So they have an opportunity to sort of reintegrate this, the instrument, back into what they recognize as being you know, maybe some barriers, some pros and cons, and some good things, as well as when they identify their goals at the very end. We have short and long-term goals on the synthesis project. Short-term generally one semester, long-term a couple semesters. And then the steps to achieve those goals. And again, it gets integrated into there. So there's a couple of places where they use the information and then use that to sort of, we hope, move forward. In our guided, as I said, it is tremendous. I think I was first sold on just because it is. You ask a student, what do you like? And you sort of say, well, I don't know. And you say, you know, and they really, at the very beginning of the slide, just to help them articulate what's getting them stuck. And that's really the truth of it. You can give them some words, or we have the ability to look and try to figure out what might be a specific question or an area that we want to probe, which really helps the student out, and they can finally identify very clearly what might be a stumbling block. And when you have them personalize those statements, it's really kind of hard for them to not look at it directly in the face and say, yeah, it's my dad, or it's, you know, I haven't really done the homework yet because I don't know where to begin. Reframing is a big piece of it. Identifying strategies, particularly with the external conflicts, helping them identify strategies for how you're going to, you know, they'll come and they'll say, okay, I'm not going to do what my dad wanted or my mother wanted. And then the next question is, okay, So what is it that you plan to say to them? So really, it's sometimes it's coaching. It's helping them figure out what it is that they're going to say in coming up and overcoming those obstacles, or at least minimizing them.
And there certainly are students that, a couple of things happen as with anything. Some students will take the CPI and will know from working with them in class, from our instructor meeting, that some of these issues on this instrument probably are high scoring for them, but they've scored them at 0 or 1, really not an issue. So there are a couple students definitely this semester that when they come in, you're just expecting it to be all 3s, and you open up like, oh my gosh, I guess this is interesting. But with any self-reported tool, that certainly happens. So, as all of us, you just have to find interesting ways to say, oh, you scored that one pretty low, but I see in your paper here you were writing about this kind of a barrier. Tell me a little bit more about that. So that's why in the class we have so much information that we can look through. It is not a required course, so that's the other part, is we get 40 students each semester we can impact in this way. On an individual, as you guys know, you get that one shot generally with them, and this one can be administered very quickly, 7 minutes or less, and so in that 1 hour you can go through some of this information. But, if you're requiring them to come back again, you kind of tend to lose them. If you're like me, they may or may not come back. You may never see them again.
Okay, what I wanted to do is, most of the information we have in what we're seeing is certainly anecdotal. We don't have numbers that we kept track of before we started giving CPI to say that it's definitely impacted the course or the students. But I was able to pull out, these are comments from reflection papers that were written before we started using CPI, and these are very common to the kinds of things I would find. They tended to be broad, they tended to be about financial, certainly, and none of these do we minimize. I mean, procrastination always seems to come up, which we can address sometimes when we discuss personality, the disorganization. So these are what we would see, but rarely did you see something specific about faulty thoughts about careers, or how do you research careers, or that whole career development. Very typical of what we would find.
And the reflection paper assignment is really just 1 page, and it's very broad in terms of what they can talk about. It's maybe 2 sentences on the syllabus of, you are expected to just write about this. And it's, what are strengths as you approach your career decision, and what are some weaknesses. That's really the only. So that introduction has not changed prior to the CPI or after. So it's really a broad, write a page on this. Very broad.
So this is an example of a student we've had since we started the CTI. So if you look at the back, her overall is 4950, so she's just a little bit above the average. Her decision making is fine. There's some real confusion there, if I recall the numbers on the back. Her commitment anxiety is getting kind of high, and again, her external conflicts as well. So really the area that I focused with her when she came in to talk to me, I thought, certainly from that instrument, would be on the commitment anxiety, which, when you looked at her comments from the reflection paper, matched up. I mean, it's far more specific than the kind of things we used to see. And so when she came in, those were some of the things that we talked about. She talked about the fact that, she thought about biology and being a veterinarian, and now she thought about maybe education, and wasn't quite sure whether she went to elementary ed or high school. She was really kind of all over on those things. And we talked about, I did ask her, so, what's going on that you have an idea and then you switch. And ultimately, I learned a long time ago, if I shut up long enough, they'll tell me. And she talked about, she just didn't know. She really didn't have specific information about those careers, so that she really couldn't latch on to one for very long, because she didn't have enough facts to back it up in some cases. And so this was early in the course. And, you know, we don't always have students that come out decided at the end. That'd be nice, but she is. She chose the decided on the synthesis project last week or so, and then was able to very clearly identify some things that she wanted to do to move forward in working with middle schoolers in biology. So, you know, she's able to combine her love of biology and middle school and teaching, and so it all works pretty well. June said something about confidence. And we talked about that last night, and I really think that hits the nail on the head. With a lot of students, they just lost any confidence in making a decision. And I think one of the things that the instrument's probably helping them do is identify those faulty thoughts, and then through the course, with all the other things that we do in the course, we're helping give them the confidence to feel like that they can move forward on a decision, and they have some very specific goals and strategies to get to those goals at the end.
And one of the interesting things that the CPI has helped us with is we do the MBTI with all the students going through the course also. And, you know, prior to the CPI, I kind of thought that if it was a perceiver versus a judger, those perceivers were having a lot more commitment anxiety because they're wanting to keep all the options open. They want to keep all those options open. So to make a career decision was very difficult. And the judgers are very much more comfortable and confident doing that because they want closure and they want decisions and they want to move on. But it didn't match up. That was the interesting part is my judgers were having lots of commitment anxiety when you think, oh, I thought you were pretty comfortable with the whole decision-making process. So this just gave us so much more to work with. But that just did not line up when you think it would.
That's a great point, because this young woman is definitely a judgment. Here's just another example. This one is a little more of a concern because she's pretty high on two of them and above the 50 percentile for all three of those. She was an interesting young woman to chat with, that's for sure. And again, though, her comments on her reflection paper, I mean, in some cases almost word for word, which you'll find on the instrument when she talks about, let's see, maybe the other gal who has the commitment anxiety. But, you know, and the stress, sort of the emotions that come through on this, you know, being terrified of the decision, failing herself and family. And so there was a lot to sit down and discuss with this one. I think, is this one that you met with? Do you remember?
I did this page, yeah.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, when you see the difference on pages, you know, she's not decided now, but when you think about some of the words that she used on the last one, worrying about failure, being terrified of making a decision, and you sort of see where she is now, she's definitely built, I feel like she's built some confidence since having an opportunity to reflect on herself and careers and having more information. Certainly recognizes she's got some very specific steps that she's now taking to try to sort of get her choices down to a few and then declare a major, with some very specific timelines to do that. So, big change from where she might have been. And certainly, again, we're not saying it's the CPI, but what the CPI has allowed us to do is to identify and help sort of guide some of that help or to identify where they might need some additional assistance. I think that was...
Yeah, and lots of the papers that were coming in talked about actually career commitment, and some of that language is coming through this semester, which was kind of cool to see based on the CPI. But we have found it very useful to give us more information and targeted questions. If you look at this and get those questions kind of in your head, those are just good tools to use as you work with students as well. But we'll see the data that comes from this class. I think a lot of it is the ongoing work with students during that 8-week period. But we're actually slightly higher in terms of our retention over these 3 semesters with students that take the course. above the institutional average. So we're seeing a little bit of success, and that's good. And some of them transfer because they finally figure out the program they're supposed to be in. You probably all deal with this too, like, well, that's kind of retention, but we really lost the student, but it's a success. So we're seeing that. And there are a number, probably, I don't know how many fill out the undecided. They're still not decided at the end of the semester. And for a while we would kick ourselves like, oh my gosh, we didn't get where we were supposed to. But that's why those goals, those 6-month goals are so very important. And we touch base with those students 6 months after the class to say, here's the goals you outlined, how are you coming on them? So they're getting not only, here's my faulty thinking, but here's some solutions to address that kind of faulty thinking. I'm going to reframe that faulty thinking, and here's some solutions to give me information interviews with more information, or do a job shadow, or whatever that kind of thing is. So just it helps in their language as they describe things. So any questions you guys have? Yeah.
Did you have to do any type of training to be able to do this?
None. Okay. And it doesn't require training. So yeah, we just purchased all the materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. So in your actual class sessions, how long do when you meet with them face-to-face, how long do those last?
Twice a week for 90 minutes.
Okay. So kind of what are some of the things that you do, besides the interpretations, what are some other things that you do with them when you're in a group?
Oh, okay. Yeah, what do we do?
A bunch of stuff. I'm trying to go through the whole thing. Well, we have a values section, so we have a couple of exercises on values that we go through. Try to mix it up with these things. So the one thing is kind of gimmicky, but they all like it. We describe a career one line at a time and then ask them that they all stand up and we ask them to sit down if they decide that's not a quality in a career they'd like. We have another one where they have to a skill story that we have them write, because we talk about skills, and so they write a skill story which is about some successful thing that they've done, and then we have lists of just skills, and then they go back with a partner and try to and work through identifying those skills.
So group project in that second
yeah.
phase where they're looking at different career options, then they choose for a group of usually 4 or 5 students. They have to then present on a particular career, and they present, there's probably 8 or 9 different characteristics, job outlook, pay, all that, the important information. So they have a group presentation that they plan for a couple of weeks, and they give back to the class. And hopefully during that time they're putting some pieces together. Every student does an information interview with someone in their career choice. The very first part of the class, first couple of days, is team builders to get to know each other. We do some sort of partner interviews with fantasy careers and classes I like. So they're actually, it's not us just asking them to record that information, but I would pair up with Robin and ask her, we do give them those questions. What kind of classes do you like, Robin? Okay, I'm going to write these down. They're kind of having to listen a little bit, and she's having to tell me, and then I introduce that to the class and say, she likes history, doesn't like biology, whatever. But it's just, there's some team building things like that stuck in there that are focused on the questions we normally ask them, so they're asking each other.
It's a second reflection paper where they either have to attend a co-curricular activity or a community group that's related either to a career that they're thinking about or that they're interested in or think is interesting. And then they need to write a reflection paper on it, and we give them some guidance. But basically what we're looking for is we're trying to help them link these sort of activities with developing themselves professionally outside the classroom. And if they can attend it, we sometimes have to interview an officer from that organization to find out how it would be beneficial to them.
In the research piece of it, we also, as a class, we go down to the computer lab. Well, now it's just devices, they all just pull them up. But we walk them through all the different sites that are out there, have them take their strong results and plug in those job titles to those resources so they can get familiar with that part. So there's a fair amount of hands-on kinds of activities.
And then there's the last little piece, which is professional sort of thing. We have them write we go through resumes and have them write, a resume. And we'll talk about interviewing. It's a cradle to grave kind of thing, although I would say that the bulk of it is on their development, and then the second biggest piece would be on resources for looking at careers. I think it's a good mix of hands-on and otherwise.
Yeah.
I just have a comment, made me remember that something we used to do in a short-term workshop was to have the participants write out their goals and objectives in a letter to themselves, and then I would hang on to those and put them in the mail 6 months later. That way they're getting a reminder in their own handwriting of something they actually produced themselves. So it was like, I don't know how it gets received, but, because I'm never there when it happens, but.
Dave, you have a question?
I was wondering just what some of those additional, you kind of mentioned like a bunch of websites that you use for that research piece, but do you have just any off the top of your head that stick out for a specific reason, or something that's kind of your go-to when you're talking to students or something like that?
Occupation Outlook Handbook has changed a lot in the last 3 years. We used to use Discover, we're still waiting for their next version of that to come back. So I think it's far more conversational and easy for students to use, and I like it because at the very bottom it has the professional associations, which is another thing I always send students to, because you can get, usually those always have student website links on them, and they, of course, the job centers give them a good idea of what sort of ways they'd be employed.
Oh, yeah, we go to the state Kansas site a lot, actually, in Kansas Works to just get familiar with job descriptions. So, you know, we drive them to job descriptions often so that they can look at that job description. They fight it, too. I don't want this is crazy, why does she have me do this? But you look at a job description and you just can start matching that. Is that really what I want to be doing? What does that person do? And it's just reframing all that stuff. What does that job look like? Oh, I thought it looked like something different. I didn't know. Oh, and that is the other thing, like with the skills story that we use, because it's got the 6-column code, you can search by realistic, investigative, whatever, and then it gives you a long list of job titles to work with. What to do with this major is through the University of Tennessee, and you subscribe to that. We also drive them, thank goodness our academic advising office has come up with, they posted all their program guides online now for any of the majors that we have in 40 states. So it's, you know, I was sitting the other day looking at sort of, he's a real gamer, and it's really hard to get him off that stuff to kind of connect with you. But when he gets to that point, he's looking at forensic technology, you know, the whole idea of information systems and finding out, tracking down hacking and all that kind of stuff, which would be really good for him. He's not interested in working with people, but he's very interested in computer programming. So we were looking at our crime and delinquency studies program and pulling in some of the forensics there, looking at information systems, and computer science was the other one. Well, computer science is huge in math, it's heavy-duty math, and he's just not a math person. So by pulling up those 3 program guides, I was able to kind of let him come up with that information of, well, I guess I'm really not that good at math, so he can kind of determine that himself. But those program guides are another great source. And if we don't have the program, I will pull up a K-State program so that, you know, again, if they're going to transfer, they're going to transfer. But X-ray Tech or something at Washburn, something like that, we're going to pull up that program guide to look at it and say, are these the kinds of courses you want to be taking? Do you think you could be successful in those? We also pull up, let me see, what else do we use? Oh, in the values portion, when we're talking about values, we also pull up corporate sites and talk about corporate values, which is kind of interesting. So, you know, Perceptive, when we toured yesterday, I haven't looked, but I know their value statement is going to describe their culture. And so by looking at a company's value statement and mission, that student can decide if that's the type of place they want to work for. So we not only talk about individual values and careers, but we talk about corporate values and finding those organizations that match those values for themselves. Any other questions?
I have one. I sat in on the role of parents, families, and hiring. So I'm wondering, is there a percentage that you would put on the students who feel that pressure because of the parent-family influence on, you know, you're my investment child, and, you know, I want you to be an accountant like me, or I want you. Do you see, is there a high percentage of that?
Yeah, very high. And on the CPI, you know, those questions that specifically ask that, that's very high. I would say that's very high.
Well, what's interesting is it's not just the conflict with the parent, but it's the idea of disappointing parents.
Yeah.
So even the ones who say that they're huge, oh, I have all the support of my parents, and then you talk to them and say, boy, if I think I've disappointed my parents, I'm going to be, it's the end of the world. And so it's the conflict, and it's not necessarily one that they would describe in a negative way, because I don't think it really occurs to them what they're saying. So, yeah, I'd say a lot of them.
And sometimes it's not even, they might not even be able to tell you what those parental expectations are. They just know that, I mean, and maybe it's not parents kind of saying, you have these 5 options and that's it. I don't know, I think it's just that it's there. They're so involved and kind of a,
I wondered about that because generationally, I was on my own for college and it wasn't, I mean, my parents supported me and wanted me to be successful, but they weren't like right there next to me all the time, and it didn't really occur to me that what I was choosing to do wouldn't, I didn't worry about letting them down that way. And I'm wondering if because they're so present so much along the whole college career, is that not such a good thing?
yeah, and sometimes it is, my parents just want me to have my mind made up, and I don't. That's the disappointment too, is I can't even decide yet, and I know that they want me to decide. They told me by the end of the semester, they'll pay my college if I have my mind made up. Well, they're not, so there's some pressure that way, and again, it's just, I want you to make up your mind. Well, they can't make up their mind until they have these resources to look at what their options are.
Yeah. I wonder if the kids really want that. Do they really want that much information going to their parents even? I mean, sometimes I think that once they're in college, that, it's like, well, I see on the website this, or as a parent, I see this, does that kind of bug them a little bit? In that, okay, I needed you maybe for my first semester to be really tied in. But it'd be an interesting question to ask the students is, that maybe was a comfortable thing for you the first semester or 2, but in time, would you have preferred that there not be quite so much of the familial? I know that flies in the face of a lot of things that happen on campuses, but, I don't know, I'm just wondering.
I think it's a mix of everything, and I can even think about, I think in some ways students want to give that responsibility to them because it means they don't need to be tracked. Just like Steve talked about this morning, that where is my Social Security card when I get hired, and where is my birth certificate? Well, your parents have it, so I think part of it is the students really aren't ready to take that on, don't feel really interested in taking on that responsibility too, maybe, and so they like to have their parents to do that. I don't know.